lifecycle approach that you're talking about transforms kind of personalization of tactic really more into a strategy that evolves with the customer relationship, not kind of against it. And we've worked kind of with an apparel brand in the past that essentially restructured their entire personalized approach around lifecycle stages for new visitors. They focused on category affinity. Whereas for first-time buyers, they really more emphasize kind of styling the purchased item itself. And then for repeat people, right, they implemented a kind of wardrobe building personalization.
Personalization should always deepen as the relationship deepens, right? You can't get it all up front. And it's not just technical sophistication, but it's a type of personalization that deployed over the life cycle ultimately. Effective personalization isn't about implementing every personalization tactic. It's about identifying the highest impact opportunities for your specific business. Yo, Chase, what's good, dude?
Hey man, how are you?
Good, man. I'm excited about today's pod.
Yeah, talk to me about it.
Yeah, we're talking about 6 personalization myths debunked. What really moves the needle in retention? I feel like there's so much buzz about that hype word personalization, so I figured we can talk more about it.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right, let's shoot this in 3, 2, 1.
From the open to the click, they're the masters of the flow. Just watch your list grow and your leads turn to go. Did we retain you so far, or do we have to extend it? If you want results, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to Send It, where we discuss anything and everything retention marketing, specifically in email and SMS marketing and e-commerce. My name is Jimmy Kim, and I'm here with my co-host,
Chase Diamond.
All right, Chase, as I kind of teased, episode 34, we're talking about personalization myths debunked. In fact, we've got 6 of them we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what really moves the needle in retention. And today, we're tackling a topic that generates a ton of buzz in e-commerce marketing world, personalization.
Yeah, man, that's right. I'm laughing because we hear this all the time. So every ESP, every marketing conference, every blog post, every social post, you name it, everyone is really pushing personalization as the holy grail of email marketing, which it is. But that being said, there really is a whole lot of noise out there about what it actually means and what really works. And we're, I guess, here to tell you what actually does work.
Yeah, exactly. We've worked with hundreds of e-commerce brands and seen firsthand what moves the needle and what's just hype. And today we're going to debunk those common myths about personalization and focus on what's actually driving retention and revenue. So if you're tired of vague advice about personalizing your email and want to know exactly and specifically what works for e-commerce brands, well, this is that episode. So let's start off by defining real personalization. Before we debunk those myths, I want to make sure that we kind of really define personalization because there's a lot of confusion where this starts.
100%, man. Let's definitely kind of break down and distinguish, I guess, between what we kind of call superficial personalization and more kind of true, meaningful personalization. Why don't we start there?
Yes, and I see too many marketers thinking about slapping a first name in their subject line and thinking they're personalization. That's table stakes in 2025.
Amen. So, all right. So, to quickly kind of establish a framework for how we think about this, there's kind of 5 primary key levels. I guess starting at the top. So, level 1 would be kind of basic personalization. So, kind of as you alluded to, first name. Other things would be like someone's simple location and some really basic kind of general recommendations, right? That's number 1. Taking a step up from there, at level 2 would be more kind of segment based kind of personalization. So, content that's specifically focused on broad customer categories, right? So if people are segmenting, let's just say like maybe like a VIP or whatever that is, right? We'll kind of explain this further. And then level 3 would be something more like behavioral kind of personalization. And this would be content triggered by specific customer actions. And we're going to break this all down later, so don't worry. But number 4 would be predictive personalization. So content that's based on kind of someone's anticipated customer needs and kind of action. So again, this is being more proactive than kind of reactive. And then lastly, level 5 would be kind of these more of this kind of customer lifecycle kind of journey based personalization, which is around like coordinated experience across touch points and kind of recency, frequency, some of that type of lovely things we like to talk about.
Yeah, that's a great framework. And I think one huge misunderstanding is that marketers often confuse segmentation with personalization. They're related, but different tools in our arsenal.
Yeah, agreed. And with that, right? So segmentation is essentially about grouping customers with similar characteristics together, while personalization is more about like tailoring the actual experience to an individual based on the specific behaviors and preferences. So like you said, they are kind of intertangled and related, but they are definitely distinct and different.
Yeah, and that's perfect. And I think that's kind of sets the framework here, or like sets the base here as we get into this. And I want to start diving into the myths because I want to make sure we kind of describe the myth and then we'll go into like what actually works behind that myth so that we can kind of debunk each one of those myths. So,
Cool.
myth number one is more personalization is always better. The number one myth that has to be that personalization is always better. I've seen brands go down this rabbit hole implementing complex personalization that actually probably hurts their performance. This is some of the common traps. So let's break down why it isn't true. This is why we look at it. So, number one, you see diminishing returns after certain personalization thresholds, right?
Mhm.
There's a complexity cost to implementing advanced personalizations, often that outweigh the benefits, basically time versus money, essentially. We've got data privacy concerns that actually can turn customers off when personalization starts to feel creepy. I know that's a conversation point we've had. We've seen segmentation based campaigns outperform hyper personalized ones in so many tests because sometimes it's not always about getting so personalized, but being about simple and being a little broad. And really, the cognitive overload for marketing teams managing too many personalization variants. I think that's probably a big one that I've seen.
Yeah, well said. I know, like with us, with our agency, like I remember working with a beauty brand in the past, and dude, I think they had something like 3 dozen different email variants based on like complicated personalization rules. And it was just too much. And there's that saying, right? Like simple scales and complex fails. In this case, like their engagement actually dropped because they spent so much time on complexity and really over engineering this personalization. And really, they kind of neglected the basic elements like compelling offers and clear CTAs because they went too extreme.
Yeah, and a maintenance nightmare of those complex systems. The opportunity cost when a huge team is spending hours and hours troubleshooting like this logic, the personalization logic, instead of optimizing their core campaigns, which really comes into a solution, which is the strategic personalization. Chase, you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, instead of doing kind of more personalization just to do more, as you mentioned, kind of the strategic personalization is a much better approach here. So to kind of dive into this, so at the top, we really want to start with kind of identifying the highest impact customer moments for personalization, right? So things like when are they making kind of their purchase decisions? What type of things happen when they abandon their cart? And depending on different types of abandonment, right? Everything from like category browsing behavior to other types of things. And then from there, right, we have to look at things like post-purchase satisfaction windows. And then lastly, kind of replenishment timing opportunities. So that's kind of like the kind of the crucial high impact moments in which you want to map out and kind of focus on the personalization. And then from there, right, you want to focus on kind of basically a couple of things. Number one being data signals that really are going to strongly predict the purchase behavior. So that was kind of more of like we talked about like being able to be proactive. So by looking at someone's like recent browse behavior, this is often more valuable than just kind of demographic data. People love looking at demographics, and while it's important, looking at the actual real-time actions or the recent actions that people have taken, super important. And then with that too, there's kind of strength in numbers. So when you look at purchase history patterns, that's more important than looking at a single one-time, one-off purchase, right? That doesn't give you as much data. And then lastly here, engagement kind of recency is more predictive than the engagement volume. Sure, if someone opened 10 emails over the last 2 years, that's cool. But how many emails have they opened over the last 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months type of a thing? Are they still engaged or were they previously engaged? And then kind of the last thing too here, the last kind of category or bucket we look at is like essentially implementing kind of like the minimum effective dose of personalization. Almost think about like the kind of MVP of like a product. That is kind of like the MVP of personalization. And with that, we're going to want to run a couple simple A/B tests to validate personalization before scaling. How are things performing? Let's look at that in kind of micro doses before we do this huge overhaul. And then kind of running kind of an ROI calculation just to understand how each kind of personalization element is moving the needle and contributing towards kind of conversion and revenue. And then lastly, when you're doing this, you have to document which personalization elements actually moves the needle versus those that don't.
Hey, it's Jimmy, and I know you're enjoying this pod, but if I can just have 30 seconds of your time, I'd love to invite you to our thriving, growing community for retention marketing. Chase and I recently realized that there is no centralized community for retention marketers, specifically focused on email and SMS. And oftentimes, most communities are just for founders or for executives only. That's why we're proud to share on this pod that we have over 350 marketers in a closed community via Slack where we talk about everything and everything email and SMS. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're invited to come join us. It's just $1 to get started for a trial, and you'll get 1, access to the Slack community, 2, weekly private newsletters on actionable things that you can do in your email marketing. 3, we have special meetups and webinars that are retention focused. 4, you'll have direct access to myself and Chase. And 5, we have special discounts and other cool perks that we have. This is where we hang out, and if you want to hang out with us, this is where you should come join us. It's called Ecom Email Certified Community, and you can learn more at ecomemailcertified.com or check the show notes for direct links. Hope to see you there, and we'll send you back to the pod now. No, that's so important. Finding that sweet spot where personalization adds value without unnecessary complexity, that's the key right there. Chase, what specific techniques have you seen work well within this framework?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. So I'd say the kind of the four would be, essentially like looking at this as like a tiered personalization strategy. So number one would be implementing kind of core behavioral triggers first. So things like the cart abandonment, the browse abandonment, and kind of some post-purchase elements. That's number one. Number two is kind of layering in and adding in kind of purchase history personalization, specifically for like replenishment or kind of topical products. People run out of these things, they need the ability to be reminded to repurchase. That's a huge way, an easy way to drive repeat purchase. And then number three would be kind of layering in kind of customer journey personalization. So having different types of content for first time buyers versus repeat buyers versus kind of VIP type buyers, treating them each a little bit different. There's kind of some nuance there. And then the last thing would be kind of constantly testing and experimenting with predictive elements, but only again after some of these fundamentals are optimized. You want to kind of get the 80-20 and really focus on the fundamentals first and then work on these predictive elements.
And something you didn't say that I would add to that is measuring the incremental lift of each personalization element is crucial here. Just because you can personalize something doesn't mean that you should always do it. You should always test and also measure at the data level. It's very important. I'm talking way beyond just opens and clicks here. All right, Chase, I want to go to myth number 2, which is first name personalization significantly impacts results, right? This is the second myth we see everywhere. Using the customer's first name in the subject line and the email is going to be a game changer for results. And the classic, hey, first name approach. Let's break down why it's mostly a myth in 2025. So here's my take on why it's a myth. So most ESPs show internal data revealing minimal lift from name personalization in like modern inboxes. I think that's a fallacy that we see in SaaS marketing often, where they're trying to like teach you that, oh, you should be using it. Really, they just want you to use more of the features. Consumer fatigue with basic personalization has kind of eroded its effectiveness. Everybody's doing it. It doesn't matter if it's your local supermarket or your local pet store food brand. Everybody does that. And many brands create that false sense of security from such an easy tactic. That's really the problem here. And I think the high default first name errors can really damage a brand's trust. We've all seen those errors when people type it in wrong or something they do wrong when they're trying to do it. And, we've tested this extensively, and I think it's starting to see diminishing returns year over year. It's like the boy that cried wolf. When every brand uses first name, it stops feeling special to customers.
Yep, that's exactly right. And the worst part is the brands think they're doing personalization when they're actually doing this. They kind of tick the box, check the box, and they move on, right? Because because they use first names, they think they're done and they kind of ignore some of the opportunities. So with this, right, kind of the solution that you and I talk about is leveraging more of like this contextual personalization that we kind of alluded to in the beginning. So instead of relying solely on first name personalization, let's talk about what actually moves the needle. So as part of this kind of framework, the first thing that we kind of want to focus on, this first bucket, is leveraging kind of behavioral content instead of name personalization. So essentially what this says is like, your cart is waiting, and that would typically outperform to something like, hey Jimmy, your cart is waiting. And then a couple other examples would be like, hey, why don't you complete your skincare routine, would outperform Chase, complete your skincare routine. I think you guys get the point, but the last one to really kind of send us home would be, back in stock, this item that you viewed. And then instead of saying something like, hey, Jane, an item you viewed is back in stock, right? I think that's pretty clear. So moving on to the next one, right? You kind of reserving the name personalization and kind of using it for more special kind of high impact moments does go a further way. So this is things like any kind of VIP recognition communication, any kind of customer service follow-ups that really are kind of more one-to-one and more personal, any kind of anniversary or milestone acknowledgments, and then kind of combining that with truly personalized recommendations or offers. That is better than just using first name to use first name every single chance you can. And then the last one that kind of want to focus on is leveraging personalization, matters more than kind of the greeting. And what I mean here is subject line offer relevance based on browse or kind of purchase behavior. So when you can focus on making sure that the subject line and the offer is specific and relevant to what they did, that is going to move the needle a lot more. And then with that too, like the email content has to then reflect kind of specific product interest. Don't just do random things. Focus it on the actual things that they've told you that they want to see based off what they viewed and they clicked on, etc. And then again, like the timing based on kind of the individual engagement pattern is super important. There's not a one size fits all. Everyone should not be getting the same email at 2 p.m. PST. It should be personal and relevant to when they're typically engaging and interacting, and typically personalized based off of their respective time zones, not the time zone that you might be in as a brand. And then the last one would be kind of the call to action relevance, dependent on the kind of the customer life cycle. So the way in which you kind of, for lack of a better word, command people to take an action or kind of incentivize or motivate people to take an action should be relevant to whether they're kind of more in the awareness phase or more kind of in the high interest, high intent phase.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think we've seen some impressive results when brands shift their focus away from like the name personalization to context personalization. For example, there was a D2C apparel company I was working with, and they saw like a 23% increase in click through rates when they replaced that whole like generic hi first name message with like a highly specific category based subject line that tied to their browsing behavior. The key is making the customer feel understood through your content, not just recognized by their name. And I think that's the key here. All right, let's keep moving on. Myth number 3, and I love this one because AI powered product recommendations are always better to boost your sales. This is a myth number 3 because I think the belief that AI powered product recommendations are the silver bullet for increasing revenue, that's not always true. Look, it's a big one, especially with all the AI hype in the market right now. There are tools that are doing and improving, and it really just depends what level you're at. But the reality is this, right? Here's the myths that I think about. Many of these recommendation engines, they operate in like a black box with like very unpredictable outputs. And mostly you see and you'll get an email and you'll get some weird thing on the email and you'll be like, wait, what is my engine doing? And it's something we've seen. I also have seen poor quality data often leads to irrelevant recommendations that hurt credibility. I think that hurts more if you are doing less on the curation on your side and you're focusing on kind of building something that's supposed to be like one-on-one personal. Definitely kind of misses the mark often. We see different categories have vastly different random like recommendation effectiveness, right? Product categories are very different depending on if you're selling men's shoes versus women's shoes or whatever it might be, where a man might be more focused on the utility, where the woman is more focused on the fashion or the style. Yeah. There's often a disconnect between the algorithm logic and the merchandising strategy, right? Something that we talk about a lot, you and I, is that you've got to be in the business as a retention marketer. You can't just be thinking about what sells and what gets clicks, but you really also need to know what merchandising looks like. And I think a lot of the AI products out there miss that mark right now. And then of course, those sometimes the complex ones versus the basic ones, I haven't really truly seen a lift in the market enough to say, oh, they're doing better. In fact, most of the time we see the basic ones, they do just fine in the market.
Yeah, not calling out anyone in particular, but I've seen a lot of brands pay really premium prices for some of this quote unquote advanced recommendation engines, really to only find out that they perform worse or just as well as kind of these basic logic that you don't really have to pay much for at all.
Yeah, $3,000 to $5,000 a month. I've seen people pay for it, and I know there's some good ones out there who are trying to work on it right now. And if you go historically, and as AI is getting better, I think we will get better at it. And I know we had Brian at Nacelle here once, and he's building for the future of it, which I'm excited about for him. Hopefully, he can get this nailed down. And that classic recommendation fails. What we've seen, like suggesting the exact product that someone's bought, or like a complementary product that someone, it just doesn't make sense together. I think that's part of the problem there too. which is why I think there are some solutions. There's some hybrids that you can put into place. Chase, what do you recommend when you think about the hybrid approach here? Hey, okay, I'm disrupting the pod for just a quick 60-second break and a quick little shout out to our title sponsors of the podcast, OmniSend. Okay, for those that don't know, OmniSend is an all-in-one email and SMS marketing automation platform specifically designed for e-commerce brands. They make it super easy to engage with customers, drive repeat sales, and create those seamless personal experiences we're always talking about. Here's 3 things I love about OmniSend. First and foremost, they're trusted by over 125,000 e-commerce merchants worldwide that absolutely love them. With a 4.8 rating star with over 6,000 reviews on the Shopify App Store, it's an obvious choice for your email, SMS, and push needs. Secondly, I love great customer support. And OmniSend, they're absolutely nailing it. They're responsive, their help docs are great, and their team is absolutely fantastic. And third, they have great features and better pricing. Pricing matters just as much as features, and OmniSend, you're going to get both of those. And they have all the features you need for your store, and their pricing is absolutely fantastic. In fact, recently I just heard a story about 2 community members that made the switch. One reduced his price from $8,500 to $3,500, which is huge, but even bigger, that $3,500 included SMS, which is absolutely wild. Then another agency I just recently talked to, they just switched their entire client base over, and he's been saving his clients anywhere from 30 to 60% off their bill, which is allowing them to take that money and reinvest it on the top of the funnel so they can make more ads and make more money. OmniSend nails these 3 things that I care most about: great support, great features, and fair pricing. Plus, I just helped Chase make the move to OmniSend with his own personal email list, and their migration was super easy. They even have a team to help you support you, and they have a great automated tool to bring your contacts right over. So if you're looking to take your email marketing to the next level, I highly recommend checking out OmniSend. They got the tools, the automation, the expertise to help your brands grow and thrive. Head over to omnisend.com/send it to learn more and start scaling your customer engagement today. Now let them know Chase and Jimmy sent you. Now let's get back to the pod.
Yeah, I like the hybrid approach a lot. So essentially, when we say hybrid, what we're saying is an approach that combines AI and kind of human oversight and merchandising intelligence to help move the needle. And we actually have one that we work with, recommend, and they happen to be a sponsor of the pod called Rayleon. So RALEON.io, I think it is, Rayleon.io. If you can't find it, let us know. But essentially, what this kind of recommendation looks like in terms of this hybrid approach is number one. So essentially you're going to want to implement category specific recommendations. And with that, right? So for example, maybe you're a company that sells consumables. It would be essentially something like replenishment timing when someone's going to run out, plus other products that are complementary to, typically what they go after. That's number one. If you're an apparel brand, maybe this is something like style matching, and then kind of completing the look recommendation. So I think that's self-explanatory, right? But the types of things that you've purchased or the types of things that you've showed interest in, plus ways in which you can kind of complete the wardrobe. So, you're buying maybe like white t-shirts, maybe you're layering in a nice pair of jeans and some nice shoes and socks or whatever you might have. For home goods, right, this might be something like a collection completion. So maybe you have 2 of the 3 items in a collection. Why don't you buy the third as well? Plus making sure that the design theme is consistent. So there's just a lot of really cool things that you can marry between the kind of the AI and then also understanding kind of the book of business that you're in. And then the last one would be maybe like an electronics brand, some kind of compatibility based accessories plus kind of some genuine upgrades. And then moving on. So with this, so in terms of creating like these recommendation guardrails, you want to have, kind of the rules and the logic, but you want to have the human oversight to make sure that it's actually following properly and there's not something that's broken in the technology chain. So this would be things like making sure that you as the kind of the brand or the agency or who have you on the brand side, you're defining rules that override kind of some of these algorithms that typically produce errors. Having kind of different types of blacklists for products that shouldn't be recommended together. And a lot of these times you spend doing these things, you'll see which things kind of, incorrectly get recommended. Just having a list of those things so that way it doesn't happen is super important. Having different types of adjustments for seasonality that algorithms might miss, right? That's super important. And then having kind of margin considerations to balance revenue and profit. Sometimes the AI and sometimes the machine learning, they're just optimizing for conversions. They're not optimizing necessarily for kind of profit and kind of the back end metrics. And then the last thing I kind of recommend is testing different recommendation approaches against each other to see which one is the best for you. Again, with a lot of these kind of AI or a lot of these kind of technology, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, platforms, some are just going to work better for you, and some are going to work better for others based on what your business is. So, testing things like recently viewed versus similar products, testing things like complementary versus category-based recommendations, algorithm versus curated collections, right? What does the AI say versus what does your merchandising person say or your product person say? And then testing things like kind of just general bestsellers versus more specific personalization.
Yeah, and we found when we done this implementation with brands that, what we call kind of like the supervised AI recommendation, where the algorithm suggests like a product, but the merchandising team has to approval oversight and can set rules. I think that's really important, is that you got to have a human in control.
Yeah, dude, exactly. And I know in the past, I think 6, 7 months ago, we worked with a beauty brand that saw a 34% increase in AOV when they switched from more of like these kind of pure algorithm recommendations to this hybrid system that we're kind of recommending, where their product team really created these kind of compatible rules for the products that was guided by AI.
And timing also matters a lot here too, because post-purchase emails are often the highest converting place for recommendations, while cart abandons are generally focused on like cart recovery, not additional products. I think that's a mistake that I see many brands ultimately make. All right, let's go to myth number 4. You need a huge tech stack for effective personalization. God, I've seen this mistake over and over again in the world of ecom, that they think that you need to have this crazy expensive, complex marketing technology stack to make this thing happen. And I think there's brands that are investing 5, 6, 7 figures to do personalization. Now, here's why this myth is absolutely false. Most ESPs, honestly offer a good, powerful native personalization capability these days. This is something that is kind of an old world fallacy. Back in 2008, when I started online, 100% these tools were needed. But today, and this day and age, a lot of those tools are often doing it, even at the most basic tools. Integration challenges often negate the benefits of specialized. The amount of time companies and teams need to work on kind of like that whole integration between two apps is always a tough one that really comes into place, right? The resources, the actual human resources you require to manage that complex text is often not, it gets overlooked because time is money and you've got 3, 4 people working on this thing. Is the lift really worth that? Probably no. Simple, well over executed personalizations often outperform those complex approaches. We've talked about that. I see that time and time again, and we see those people get bloated tech stacks. And I always say this, right? It doesn't matter at the end of the day on technology, because you need a good marketing strategy and a good marketing fundamentals ultimately in order to make this thing work. So those are the myths that I've seen.
Yeah, dude, that's spot on. I mean, I've seen brands, as you kind of mentioned and alluded to, like with basic setups, outperform brands that have these really sophisticated, expensive enterprise stacks, just simply because they executed the fundamentals really well. They're just doing marketing better and more basic, and it just works.
Yeah, and absolutely. And tech is rarely the limiting factor. It's usually strategy and execution ultimately. And the solution all often is just to have a good ESP, something that has personalization in the ecosystem, like Omnisend, for example, another one of our sponsors we're talking about here. But instead of complex stacks, it's more about an effective approach ultimately. So let me give you the framework, Chase, since we're talking ESPs, and this is kind of my jam with it. But to be ESP centric, it's very simple. First of all, you want to maximize what your ESP ultimately has. This is like people run and tried to get so much more stuff before they've even maximized what their ESP has. And most modern ESPs like Omnisend have powerful segmentation, dynamic content, and triggering capabilities. It's all already in there. And then, of course, you've got all these data fields and tags that you can do. In fact, Omnisend does tagging, which Klaviyo doesn't do very well. Omnisend actually does a better job tagging, which can create sophisticated personalizations without even additional tools. I think this is where people lack the creativity in their marketing mind, where they should be thinking about how can I take this idea and use tagging to identify so that I can come back at them later. There's also custom events that can drive, advanced behavioral personalization, being able to tag people who are going to like your help desk page or different pages and being able to understand why they might be there. And of course, the beautiful thing about all these ESPs is they have great APIs overall, right? And being able to pull that external data when it's truly necessary and bringing it in, I'd rather spend the time building that and going to, an Upwork or one of those places and hiring someone to help me do that than to go buy another tool just to go do that for me, right? Another thing that people need to really focus on is quality over quantity. And I'm talking about data. I think that often, again, clean, reliable data and systems outperform messy data in an advanced system. Chase, when we were moving you over to OmniSend recently, remember I was like, man, what are all these pages and pages of data you've got over in your Klaviyo system? You're like, I don't know. I've been integrating third-party systems and they've been just pouring data and I've just been storing it, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I told you is like, dude, we need to clean this thing up and like do some data cleansing and normalize it before adding new data sources back in here. And that's exactly what we did. We got rid of like 90% of that because it was all junk. We're just stored data like hamsters in their cheeks. Like we're just storing it just to chore because it's available.
Yep.
And you really need to focus on that high priority customer points that are over like comprehensive files, right? What actually moves the needle for people, right? And last, look, there is a reason to have point solutions for specific reasons and validated use cases. You know, like Rayleon, you talked about having a technology that only helps you prove concept after the manual process is done. Point and case, the AI segmentation engine they do, that is something that you probably do every day that they can automate for you. You also want to make sure you're calculating ROI before and after. What is it saving time? Is it making you more money? Is it doing better things for you? Or are you actually hurting yourself because you're spending 6 hours in this application to do the thing that you probably could have done in less time ultimately, right? And so it is important to think about the total cost of ownership of integration and maintenance overall.
Hey, it's Chase, taking just 30 seconds of your time because I found something game-changing for e-commerce marketers and agencies. If you happen to be drowning in retention marketing tasks, we have a solution for you. It's AI. There's an AI strategist, AI segmentation, AI email builder. It's called Rayleon, and this is the platform that helps marketers like myself and yourself create everything from emails to custom segmentation based on your data and your email marketing strategy. I mean, imagine getting everything from an audit to campaign planning in just a handful of clicks and in under 5 minutes. Their AI handles everything from segmentation to strategy and creating on-brand copy that actually converts. Brands using Rayleon save about 50% of their retention marketing time and see an average of 3x ROI. Yes, you're going to save time and make more money. Talk about a no-brainer. And this is really why brands like Coast, Ginger Milk, and Life Pro trust them and really utilize them and start recommending them to everyone. So head to rayleon.io, that's RALEON.io, for a 3-month email AI segmentation playbook in just 60 seconds. Yes, it's 100% free to try, and this will be the best 5 minutes you spend today, I promise. Rayleon.io, let them know that myself and Jimmy sent you, and we're now back to the pod. Yeah, dude, I want to quickly talk about kind of the maturity model that we've kind of developed for personalization to help brands kind of identify the right investments at the right time. So, in terms of like this kind of personalization technology kind of maturity model, there's kind of 4 stages. And the first stage is the foundation stage, where you can basically maximize the ESP's capabilities, like you talked about, where you just set up tracking fundamentals. Just keep the
Yeah.
basics there. That should help you kind of do enough. And then as you're kind of growing and expanding, the second step is kind of the expansion stage where you want to add kind of specific point solutions for validated use cases. And then the next one would be at that point, right, like the integration stage. So you want to connect then systems for this kind of cross channel personalization. And as you can see, right, these are the building blocks. So the last stage would be kind of the optimization stage. You want to basically implement advanced testing and analytics.
Yeah, dude, that was a perfect idea. And, it's a great example how, different clients are doing it. Let me kind of tell you one that we just recently worked with real quick, and they were on Shopify and ESP, and they create what felt like advanced personalization by creatively using tags and events, and they achieved like a 28% repeat purchase rate increase without any additional technology, literally leveraging what's in front of them. And I really was happy for them because I was like, wait, explain what you're doing here. And they're like, well, when they make their first purchase, we tag as a first purchase. When they make their second purchase, we tag, and then you apply those filters on the top level so that when someone is making a purchase, we know immediately without relying on the system and anything else because the purchase action has happened. That's just being creative with the product and technology you have. They say most SaaS people or most products that SaaS out there, like you're utilizing 20% of the product, but you're paying for 100% of it. Dude, just step it up. get in there deeper, utilize the tools. That's why tools like OmniSend are winning, because they are focused on that 20% and they still have that 30, 40, 50, 60%. But especially when you get to 60, 70, I don't think I've ever met a user actually using 100% of any SaaS tool out there. In fact, when I think about it, and that tech stack debate often masks the real challenge. And I think the real challenge is having a strategic clarity and knowing what personalization elements will actually impact your specific customer base. And that leads us to kind of myth number 5. I think this is a perfect segue to that. Myth number 5 is personalization requires a massive amount of customer data. God, this 5th myth is the effectiveness of personalization. And it's a big fallacy because people think more data is better. And the reality is it's not better. It leads to analysis paralysis and often creates more privacy concerns than it does help. Chase, what do you think about this? Why do you think this is false?
Yeah, first analysis paralysis thing you just mentioned is totally correct, right? It results from having just too much data that often prevents kind of inaction, right? So people are just paralyzed by it. They just don't know where to start. They're very overwhelmed. I think that's the first one. I think the second one has to do with kind of privacy regulations, right? Like they're increasingly limiting the extensive data collection, everything from Meta to Google and Apple. Like everyone is moving towards this direction, so it's really difficult. I'd say most brands also, as you mentioned before, while they don't use most of the tech stack, they're also not using most of the data they collect. A lot of it's just collecting dust. They collected it, it's sitting there. By the time they ever think about it, maybe it's stale at that point. And then kind of the last two I can think of is a few kind of high quality data points often predicts behavior better than many kind of low quality ones. So if you have a few of the right ones, I think that's really all you need to be able to help make the right decision. And then lastly, right, like I'd say kind of customer comfort with data sharing has limits that can really create backlash. So, that being said, like I've seen brands with hundreds of data points, right, who can really only actively use, let's call it maybe a dozen of them for personalization. The rest just creates complexity and noise, and again, takes your eye off the ball of what's really important. And with kind of these privacy regulations that are only going to increase at a state, region, country, continent, level, whatever, um, the liability of holding a lot of this unnecessary data could be costly.
Yeah, and instead of collecting everything and everything possible, focus on the high value data. And I'm talking about the high value data strategy ultimately. Number one, you would think about prioritizing zero party and first party data. That's what really matters. It's directly collected through preference data, which is zero party, which is like we've talked about this on other pods before. We've also observed behavioral data from your own channels. This is first party data. So they've added a product, left the cart, browsed, whatever that might be. That's first party data that you're getting because you're getting these behavioral signals in there. And create a clear value exchange for customer data information. Ask for their birthday so we can give you a free something, or your anniversary so you can do something. It's very easy to ask customers, especially when they like your product and you can give them a good value exchange. They're going to listen ultimately. You also want to focus on predictive data points, right? Browsing behavior indicates high predictive purchase intent. They browse abandonment, they're looking. If they leave something in the cart and they left it, they thought about it, right? Like these are right in front of you, and these will help you kind of indicate what the future behavior, the purchase history might look like. You just got to start understanding that and really lean into that, right? You also have things like engagement, recency, frequency, and depth. Think about all of that information predicts their retention, right? Are they no longer opening and clicking your emails? Are they no longer visiting your website? Has it been 90 days since they visited your website? Oftentimes we give up on those humans, but the reality is that their engagement is basically telling you upfront that they are no longer interested, or they're out of the market, or whatever it is not resonating anymore. And of course, those responses to those previous communications predicts future engagement. Again, just like I just kind of mentioned, like you've got to remember that these are the things that you got to think, right? And it's important, right? Like the thing that I tell people is like, you want to start implementing progressive profiling. Start with the minimal data collection. Like try to figure out what the most minimal data you really need to operate is, and start there. And then gradually build those profiles based on those different interactions that are happening, time preferences to moments of high engagement. You want to start to try to understand where that's coming in from. And then you want to use those behaviors to infer preferences rather than just asking, right? Trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I want to kind of hone in on something you just talked about, and I kind of just want to double down on it. So The most effective approach with all of what we're seeing and all that we're talking about is what we call that minimal viable personalization data, right? The MVP of the personalization data, where you can go identify the 5 to 7 key data points that will drive 80% of your personalization value and focus really intensely and go really deep on those. And you're going to be more than okay.
You nailed it, dude. For most e-commerce brand, the core set of these include purchase history, browse history, engagement recency, product category affinity, and maybe response to previous offers. That's really it. A great example is, again, I'm going to bring that skincare company I talked about before. We worked with them and replaced their 25 question complex preference quiz with 3 simple question versions. And the completion rate went from like 12% to 67% because you're not asking them a lot of stuff. And the simpler data actually drove better personalization results because they had the data, they had the right data on their customers. It's sometimes just that simple. And a lot of people, man, we jump into the tools, we lean into the tools, and we get over crazy with the way that we think about it. Sure, I'd love to know 25 personalization points when only 12% of my audience is filling it out. What good and use is that personalization data? That's something you got to ask yourself. Which leads me to myth number 6. The final myth we see in this personalization works the same way across the entire customer lifecycle, and it's equally effective. And the answer is no, it's not.
Yeah, and I think it's a subtle but important one that we're going to end on, where essentially brands often apply the same personalized approach to new visitors, first-time buyers, repeat customers, and loyalists. And the reason that this I think is false is a couple of things. So number one is the data available at different lifestyle stages varies dramatically. Right, they're getting different data points. They have different awareness levels. They're frankly in different mindsets of buying versus not purchasing. And with that too, like the customer's receptiveness to personalization does change throughout their journey. It's not the same at the beginning versus kind of near the end, and then after the purchase, it's not the same. They're not in the same frame of mind. And then the business impact of personalization will differ as well depending on the stage. And then the types of personalization that work best shift as the relationship develops. You don't want to treat someone that's bought from you a couple times as like a newbie. They're familiar with you. You should be familiar with them. Don't treat them like they're there for the very first time on your website, don't know anything about you. And then with this, testing kind of shows that significantly different ROI on personalization by life cycle stage. So make sure that you are doing that properly and that you're not treating them as kind of one size fits all. And when brands do invest kind of heavily in this sophisticated personalization for acquisition, those resources kind of would be much better suited and driving better results, kind of on the retention side as well.
Or even better, when brands attempt deep personalization with first-time buyers, when they simply don't have enough data to do it effectively, I see that happen often. Chase, this is why we recommend aligning personalization strategies to customer lifecycle strategies, right? Lifecycle goes like this, right? We've all talked about it, but we're going to go through it real quick. So you start off with the prospect, the new visitor stage, and you want to focus your kind of personalization on the behaviors, browse, search. You want to use predictive cohort modeling rather than individually personalization, right? We know based on this ad that we're driving this traffic to, this is the type of personalization that works for them, right? You've got to be thinking broader when you're going through it. You want to prioritize the category and interest over product specific content. That's very easy to understand. Again, based on what they're looking at. And the goal is simple: to drive first purchase with relevant category introduction. That's the way you personalize it, right? Then you go into the first time buyer stage, right? You emphasize the purchase based personalization to validate buying decisions ultimately by introducing product education to personalize the product purchased items, right? And you want to focus on how do I expand that category based on the entry purchase. Like this product, most people will buy that product, or this product, most people will end up buying this product. And the goal really is to secure the second purchase through a complementary product, right? And then, of course, this third part of the active life cycle really is the repeat customer stage, where you're implementing deep cross category personalization, where you're deploying based on patterns that you've seen, where you want to promote one product and another product, and you want to use the engagement data to personalize content depth and frequency ultimately there, right? Super simple to kind of think about it that way. And the goal is to increase the purchase frequency and average order value. Those are probably your two goals when you're working with it. And then you get into what we call the loyal VIP customer stage. These are your best customers ultimately. And they really want to be focused on exclusivity and recognition and personalization, right? They want to know about the latest sale. They want to get that early access, the sneak peek. They want to feel special ultimately. And the key is to deploy personalization for their upcoming needs and really help you predict based around what they might buy next. And the goal here is really simple. It's maximizing CLTV or customer lifetime value and creating advocates for it. And finally, the last part of life cycle is that at risk or lapse customer. These are people who are no longer really purchasing their, you need to really use that historical data purchase to create memory based personalizations, which means like, remember you purchased this, or remember this helped you do this, remember that. Like, you want to implement that personalization to try to win them back over based on previous experience that you might have. And the key here is to test the re-engagement by kind of being aggressive at these people. I think that's the big key about a win back here. And the goal is to really reactivate that relationship. And as you kind of heard there, when I went through those 4 or 5 there, which is prospect, the first time buyer, the active repeat buyer, the loyal customer, and then one at that risk, every one of those has different personalizations, which is why you cannot do a one size fits all motion here.
Dude, totally agree. And really kind of this life cycle approach that you're talking about transforms kind of personalization from a tactic really more into a strategy that evolves with the customer relationship, not kind of against it. And we've worked kind of with an apparel brand in the past that essentially restructured their entire personalized approach around life cycle stages. So, for example, like for new visitors, they focused on category affinity, whereas for first time buyers, they really more emphasize kind of styling, the purchased item itself. And then for repeat people, right, they implemented a kind of wardrobe building personalization. So, that said, the results were super cool and they performed really, really well. So they saw a 41% increase in second purchase conversion rate and a 27% increase in customer lifetime value over 12 months. So really, really big numbers.
No, that's real data right there. And if you're a 7, 8, 9 figure brand, that's a huge increase of
Yes.
dollars. And that means as a retention marketer, you're doing really great. And the reality is the key insights is that personalization should always deepen as the relationship deepens, right? You can't get it all up front. And it's not just technical sophistication, but it's a type of personalization that's just deployed over the life cycle ultimately. All right, Chase, look, I want to wrap this thing up because we've been going a while on this and I'm sure we're spinning some heads here. But let's summarize the key points for our listeners who want to cut through the whole personalization hype and focus on what actually drives results. I think the most important takeaway is that effective personalization isn't about implementing every personalization tactic. It's about identifying the highest impact opportunities for your specific business.
Yeah, I think the good news for people is that it's all about being strategic rather than comprehensive. You don't have to go do a million things. You just have to do a few things really, really well. So, a couple key takeaways from kind of this episode would be number one, you really want to focus on more meaningful personalization that impacts purchase behavior, not just kind of this kind of cosmetic personalization. That's number one. Number two, start with kind of more strategic personalization at key customer moments rather than trying to personalize anything and everything. Number three is context and behavior based kind of personalization is going to outperform simple name personalization every single time. Number four is implementing hybrid based recommendation approaches that combine AI plus kind of the human merchandising intelligence is super important. And then number five would be maximizing your ESP's native capabilities before investing in additional technology is super important. Make sure that when you're using OmniSend, you exhaust it to its fullest before thinking about using anything else. Number six would be prioritizing a customer kind of small set of high value data points rather than trying to collect everything under the sun. It's way easier to get a few things from your customers than to ask them for anything and everything. And then the kind of two more quickly would be it's really important to align this kind of personalized strategy to the customer lifecycle stages. We mentioned this a couple times, so I just wanted to reiterate that. And the final thing here would be make sure that you're testing and measuring the incremental impact of each personalization element.
Remember that the goal isn't personalization for its own sake. It's to use personalization to create better customer experiences, drive retention and revenue.
Really well summarized. That's a great way to summarize it. And at the end of the day, personalization is a means to an end, not the end itself. So For those folks that kind of are listening and those that want to take action, I recommend starting with an audit of your current personalization efforts against these myths, see kind of where you stand up, and really identify where you might be falling into these traps and apply the frameworks that we discussed.
And I'd consider your biggest opportunity gap, whether that's behavioral triggers, life cycle alignment, or a recommendation strategy, and focus there first. Chase, dude, that was great, man. I think that's a wrap here for this show. The 6 personalization months debunked. What really moves the needle in retention. If you enjoyed this pod and you nerded out with us here today, make sure you hit the subscribe button, you follow, you leave us a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform. That is really what it comes down to. And also leave a comment below if you have any thoughts around personalization, something that's working for you. We'd love to hear what's happening out there. And you can follow this show on X, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, IG, etc. Right now, there's a few ways to connect with us here. If you enjoyed the Send It Pod and you want to join our newsletter, of course we have a newsletter, right? ecomemailmarketer.com. We drop a newsletter only about retention marketing each and every week. We get insightful. We do breakdowns. We do so much every day. To put it, it's not every week. I'm sorry. Every day we're putting a newsletter out now at this point as we continue to really work on that daily newsletter. Secondly, we have a certification and community available. So if you want to join a community with us and other about 350, 370 like-minded marketers in the market, we have a community about it. Link in the show notes below. And then secondly, if you just really came here, stumbled across this video and you've really found us insightful and think, hey, I'd love to learn from that Jimmy and Chase dude. Well, we've got this thing called Ecom Email Certified. You can check us out again. Link in the show notes below. Go check us out. I highly recommend it. And of course, you can follow us on social media. Chase is found everywhere. Chase, where can they find you?
Yeah, every platform, Chase, Diamond, no A in Diamond.
Yeah, literally every platform. And you can find me because I'm a little bit more focused on LinkedIn X today. That's where you'll find me. You'll find me under Yo Jimmy Kim or Jimmy Kim myself. All right. Next week, Chase, we're back. We're going to do episode 35. I think it's 35. Yeah, 35. It's from subscriber to brand community, building an engaged tribe online. I think one of the things that people often mistake about email lists, it's not about email lists of a customer list. You know, people think about it like that. It's really your tribe. You're creating a community behind it. We're going to talk about what that really means for a brand and how you should be treating people and how you should be thinking about that. So with that being said, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. See you guys later.
From the open to the click, they're the masters of the flow. Just watch your list grow and your leads turn to go. Did we retain you so far, or do we have to extend it? If you want results, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it.